Hello and welcome to a very special How I Paint Things. Now today on the table we've got a Saurus warrior, who is the backbone of the Seraphon armies, or Lizardmen if you prefer. These guys are pretty cool. They've really got that neat transition between scales and skin, and there's a lot of neat little details on them. These guys are pretty simple to paint too. You haven't got to worry too much about sort of really tiny details, but with a little bit of attention paid to them, they can really pop. They look quite cool on the table too. So, without fussing around too much, let's get a quick look at how we're going to start off. So to begin with, I've given him a spray of Macragge Blue. Now, he's not going to be an ultramarine, but it's a good base coat for all of the blues that we're going to do, which will form the majority of the miniature. We're then going to start off by giving him a base coat of Calidor Sky, and we're going to put that all over the model. Then we'll dry brush his scales with Skink Blue. We're going to do the fleshy bits, like his underbelly and along the crest of his head there, with some Sotek Green, and then we'll do a little bit of Temple Guard Blue over the top. When all of those are done, we're going to hit him with a Coelia Green shade. Then from there, we're going to move on to Mephiston Red and a dry brush of Riser Rust, just to bring up his shield there. Caribou Crimson over the top of those. Then any minor details like his teeth and claws in Xandri Dust, the gold bits in Retributor Armor, and then we'll Agrax Earthshade both of those steps. Nice and simple. So let's go ahead, get it cracking, put that Calidor Sky on now. You might notice today, as a palette, I'm using a plate, which works perfectly well. Like, the whole idea is that it's just got a lacquered, smooth surface, which won't absorb the water that we're going to be using in our paint. So it's pretty good to paint from. Just prepping up my Calidor Sky, and then, with whichever base brush you like to use, just go ahead and we'll cover the whole miniature. I mean, you can skip the shield if you want to, but make sure you're getting all of the lizardy bit with Calidor Sky. You'll probably find you won't need a second coat of this, but if you do, you can just quickly bop over the top of it again. However you go about it though, just get on there now with your Calidor Sky. Now once that's dry, you'll see there's quite a significant difference in colour between the original Macragge Blue and then that Calidor Sky. So it's going to suit us just fine for what we've got in mind. Next we're going to grab some Skink Blue and grit out our dry brush. Just dry brush the edge of the base to see how much we're going to leave behind, not very much, and get in and start dry brushing all of his scales. Now it doesn't matter too much if you end up putting a little too much on, let's say. You can be quite generous with this, because we want that difference in texture, okay? When we go ahead and wash over the top of this, it's going to bring these two colours closer together, and it won't look quite as pronounced. So oops, maybe not that much, be a little more generous than you normally would, and just make sure you're getting all of these scales. So around his face, he's got a few, like on the sides of his legs. Just cruise around and make sure you're getting all of these with your Skink Blue. Now when that's finished, you'll have quite a sharp difference in colour, and it might look a little strange first going on. But don't worry too much, because remember, we are going to do more to the model. So I've got here my Sotek Green, and I'm just going to get in and start painting in all of the fleshy bits. I've got my small base brush here. Now when you get close to anywhere that you've already done the scales, just leave a little fraction, a tiny bit between the Calidor Sky base coat and this Sotek Green, because when we wash it, it's going to help, mark the edge of those two areas. So there's not really many good places where I can show this, but like up on his face here is probably a good place to start. Let's just start close to his scales, and we'll draw the brush away so that we're not going to hit any of the detail we've already painted. Things like the shield and what have you, don't worry if you get anything on those, because again, anything that we're going to paint later doesn't really matter. But let's get on now, all these fleshy bits. Let's do Sotek Green. Now that we've got the base coat laid down on that Sotek Green, you can see where the sort of skin is and where those scales are going to meet. Now, Saurus are normally not this dark, so let's go ahead and grab some Temple Guard Blue, and we're going to go over many of the same areas again. So if I get in here, I've probably got way too much on my brush, but just cruise around. You might find you need a second thin coat in some areas, but all you're doing is just going over that Sotek Green. In some places, you may even find you want to leave a little of the Sotek Green showing just at the edge of the join. So you've got scales, green, and then Temple Guard Blue. But that's That's up to you. You decide what you like the look of. Either way, let's get this Temple Guard blue on now. Now we're looking pretty messy at the moment, and you may find as well that leaving a little more of the Sotek green in the recesses looks good, but that's up to you. Frankly, I like it to be a little brighter. So what I've got now is my Coelia green shade and big old shade brush. Let's just go around now and I'm going to coat the whole model in this stuff. Same as you always would. Make sure you're working it into the recesses, so make sure you're getting into all of those scales. And then we'll give it about, say, half an hour or so to dry. Now once that's dried, this is what we're left with. And you can see it's brought down those scales quite a bit and introduced a bit more shading to the Temple Guard blue that we'd used. Now bearing in mind, I'm not always going to show you the fastest way of doing something. Sometimes it's just the easiest to replicate. So for this, I've got my Temple Guard blue again and the old medium layer brush. And what I'm going to do is just layer back over some of the areas of his skin because I want to reintroduce a little bit more of that light blue. So leave some of the areas like closer to the scaled areas, for example. Leave those that shaded green, but take your time and I guarantee this will really help pick up the details on this Saurus. So I'm going to go back over again with Temple Guard blue as a layered highlight here. So a good example, let's get under his belly here. And if I go along this big flat area, just avoid that very central sort of crest under his belly. We'll highlight that though anyway. It gives us plenty of definition there. Now you can skip this step if you'd fancy, but I think if you really want these guys to look the business, just a little extra work here will really help make them stand out. So if you want to, cruise around now and just add a little bit more Temple Guard blue back on your model. Now after that second layer of Temple Guard blue, there is our skin and scales done. And I think that looks pretty cool. It does take a little bit longer than just sort of dry brushing it or skipping that step, but I think it adds a lot. So if you've got the time, do go ahead. So next what we've got is a little Mephiston red. And let's get in there and just start painting in his shield. This is not too difficult. All you're looking for is a nice solid base coat of red. But just when you get too close to where skin or scales are that you've already painted, obviously you want to be a bit careful around there. So this might take a couple of thin coats. And you can do, can I get to it from this angle? Here we go. You can do the back of the shield at the same time. Now once we've done that Mephiston red, it's time to go ahead with a dry brush of Riser Rust. Now same as before, this is going to look really bright going on. And what you want to do is start from the edge and come in towards the center, so that there's less chance of you sort of skipping over and accidentally hitting the blue that we've already painted. So this might take a couple of passes to build up that color, but you'll see as we spend a little time going back over it, it'll brighten up the edges of some of the larger scales while making the smaller ones stand out. So you can do as much as you like of this. I do recommend go what looks like a little overboard to begin with, because we're going to shade over the top of this, and you've seen what happens when we shade those dry brushed areas. Now I've gone over that a couple of times just to make sure that the colour was going to be nice and strong on the edges of everything. Now I've got my Carroburg Crimson and the odd shade brush. You don't need to be particularly generous with this, just enough to get into the recesses. Now that that wash is dried, let's look at another quick optional step. I've got here a little bit of Fire Dragon Bright. This is quite a sharp orange colour, so you want to be sparing with it. But just use this to pick out some of the extreme edges of these larger plates. Now, this is very sharp going on, but as it dries, you'll notice it becomes a little less intense. If you want, you can hit it with a little bit of bloodletter glaze over the top as well, and that'll help bring it down and match that a little bit closer. So what I'll do is once I've put these on, I'm going to hit it with a little bloodletter. Like I said, this is purely optional, and this might be useful if you're doing units like Temple Guard or something where you want them to look a little bit nicer. Now, I'm not going to do his whole shield, but let's just, there we go, finish that one off a little bit more. Then here's our bloodletter glaze. This is going on with just a standard brush, because you don't need very much of this. You'll find it helps bring out the redness overall. just enough to sort of cover it. You don't need this to really seep into the recesses as much as you do the shade. Then with that dry, we'll get out our Retributor armor and a standard brush, medium layer brush, and just cruise around and start filling in the gold details. You might want to switch down to a small layer brush for some of these little dealies. Just remember, do check that he's got these little spinities on some of his back places. Each of these models will be different, so take your time, cruise around and hit all of these gold details now. Then with the gold done, fix yourself up a little bit of Xandri dust and just get in and paint in claws and teeth. There's not very many of these areas, so you don't need to worry too much about them, but anywhere that's going to stand out, just get in there now. Your small layer brush will help. Now as a tip when it comes to painting teeth, instead of painting up and down them, where you're going to hit the lip, just sort of dry brush almost along the row of teeth. And you'll find you'll be able to pick them out that much quicker. Now, look at that smile. I almost forgot he actually has a tongue, so I went back with a little Mephiston red and finished that in. Now, those two colours done, we're going to hit it with some Agrax Earthshade. If you want a slightly brighter gold, or you would like a warmer tone for your gold, use instead Reikland Fleshshade. I would still use Agrax Earthshade for the claws and teeth, but because this is how I'm going to paint them, I like a slightly sort of brassier looking gold. But your mileage may vary. You can change that up if you'd like. What I'm going to do now is, with my medium layer brush, go around and just paint in all of the areas that I've got gold with a little bit of Agrax Earthshade, and then do the same to teeth and claws. Now once that's dried, there's really just a couple of details left to do. So I've got here Steel Legion Drab, and I'm going to paint in the wood on his spear here with this. Just be a little careful as you get close to the gold. But for the most part, you just want that sort of bland beige wood colour. So take your time, it's a fairly quick step, and just get this on here. Now while that's drying, before I go back over with a little more Steel Legion Drab, I'm going to highlight the gold. And for that I've got Liberator Gold. You don't need to be particularly careful, just enough to bring a bit of brightness to some of these areas. You see I'm really just sort of slapping it where I want it to go. All you're looking for is just to create a little bit of sharpness to some of this gold. So anywhere you want to highlight it, just get in there now. Then with the shaft of his spear finished, let's get a little Abaddon Black and we'll fill in the spear itself. You might find you need to do a second thin coat in some areas, particularly where the gold is shining through, but otherwise just fill this in. You're pretty much finished after that. Now, just like always, when I say we're almost finished, that normally means there's 2 or 3 details that I've forgotten. And in this case, there's a little Ushabti bone, and just paint in along the tops of claws and teeth, leaving that shaded area in the bottom for a bit of depth. Nice and simple, see? And then if you want to paint the eyes, I've got a little Avalanche Sunset here, though I've seen people paint them all sorts of colours. Just water it down carefully. There we go. That'll do. Now with those last couple of details done, our Saurus warrior is complete, and he's looking pretty cool. These older miniatures tend not to have a huge amount of detail on them, so you can actually spend a little more time when you're painting them picking out what you want to stand out. I think that's kind of cool. These guys are awesome. I mean, lizard warriors, you can't sort of beat that craziness. It's old school Warhammer fantasy, and they fit perfectly well into Age of Sigmar nowadays too. So what I'm going to do is go ahead, bust on his base, get a couple of photos, and as ever guys, if you've got any questions, drop them down there in the box below. We can get in touch on both my Facebook or Twitter, which are both there too. As well, special shout out to my patrons, lovely fellas over there on How I Patreon, which I'm never going to get sick of saying, and is likewise linked down there too. So as ever guys, thank you very much for your time. You enjoy the rest of your day.